Hello, everyone. Pardon me for interrupting your lunch. Thanks for letting us interrupt that wonderful bowl of pasta with our chatter. My name is John Fahey. I'm a reporter at Forbes. I cover energy for the magazine and for our website. And we have a little discussion here for you today called From Here to Sustainability, What Will It Take? And we have, thankfully, two wonderful experts here to talk about it. This question, from here to sustainability, what will it take, has been asked, thank you, has been asked over and over for many years by renewable energy experts and renewable energy companies and traditional oil energy companies and scientists. But I think that given the events of today in the Gulf, this question has probably never been more important than it is now. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. And I'm sure all of you have rolled around this question in your brains, and as have I. And this is how I see it. Petroleum is an extremely effective product and a very, very tough competitor. I ran across this in my reporting recently, something you probably already know. Its job is to carry energy, and for a pound of gasoline carries 6,000 watt-hours of energy. The very best lithium-ion batteries carry 110 watt-hours per pound. It's just not a fair fight. And not to mention, we also have 150 or so years of experience, billions of dollars worth of equipment and procedures and lobbyists and infrastructure and products, by which I mean cars, that are committed to petroleum. Gas and diesel, their share of the transportation market is well over 90%. And then, of course, there's the issue of cost. The capital is in the ground, so the marginal cost of production is relatively cheap compared with any new technology. And then this new technology, as we know, isn't yet as good as the old technology, at least in its primary function, which is to carry energy. So what's not being accounted for here, as economists will tell you, is the societal cost of doing things unsustainably, right? So a gallon of gas, even with all that energy, needs to look to the marketplace no better than a battery or a gallon of advanced biofuel, because hopefully the comparatively lower societal cost of the advanced biofuel or the battery. So how do we do this? How do we get there? Thankfully, as I mentioned before, we have two experts here. They know, and they're going to tell us right now at lunch. So to my far left, we have Libby Cheney. Libby is the Vice President of Safety, Environment, and Sustainable Development for Shell Upstream Americas. She's also responsible for managing social performance and regulatory policy for Shell's oil and natural gas exploration and production activities across North, Central, and South America. It's a big job. She's had tremendous technical experience, and she's on the board of, among other places, the North American Carbon Capture and Storage Association and the Graham Environmental Sustainability Institute at the University of Michigan. And then to my direct left, we have Joel Makower. Did I do that right? Makower, sorry. I worked on this. Joel Makower. He's the executive editor of greenbiz.com and its sister sites, climatebiz.com, greenerbuildings.com, greenerdesign.com, and greenercomputing.com. All these are published by Greener World Media, of which he is co-founder and chairman. Joel is also the principal author of the annual State of Green Business Report. He's a senior strategist at Green Order, a sustainability consultancy, and he works with companies to improve their environmental strategy, and as well as advises companies focusing on environmentally sustainable products and services. He's a former nationally syndicated columnist and the author of more than a dozen books, including the latest Strategies for Green Economy. The AP, they're good at concise wording. They call them what do they call him, the guru of green business practices. So there we go. I'm first going to ask them both to give a short introduction, and then I'm going to ask a few hopefully extremely difficult questions. And then we'd also like to hear questions from you in the room. We'd really like to make this a discussion. So think some up, and as you hear them talk, think up more. Okay, Libby, why don't we start with you?
Great, thanks. I think probably I need to start by addressing the topic that John brought up initially, and that is the Deepwater Horizon incident in the Gulf of Mexico. And so we can put that on the table in a clear way, and although I'm not going to be able to answer all of your questions about it, I'll be as honest as I can when it comes time for questions and answers. This was just a tragic incident, and the thoughts and prayers of all the Shell employees remain with the families of those who died in the incident, those who were injured in the incident, and the Gulf Coast communities that are going to bear the brunt of the oil spill into the Gulf. If anything good can come from something this bad, we believe that it's going to be a very thorough investigation of what happened and broad sharing of those findings so that we can ensure that it just doesn't ever happen again. So despite the seriousness of this incident, I don't think we can lose track of the real global energy challenge, the reality of the challenge that we face today and that we're going to face into the future. And we at Shell kind of see that in three components. The first one is around demand, energy demand. Demand is going to grow. Demand is related to population, and it's related to prosperity. And over time, as those things come up the curve, more energy is going to be needed. So we're going to see demand grow. We're going to see supplies tighten, and that's because new additional oil and gas anyway is becoming harder and harder to find and can't keep up with what we see demand, the pace that we see demand growing at. So the easy oil is gone and supplies are going to tighten. That's the second component. And finally, the environment is going to be more and more stressed as we put more CO2 into the air until we can truly gather and put the kinds of innovation we need into place. So those are the realities that we believe we're working on. And then there's this global call for a much more sustainable energy supply. And so back to the topic of today, what's it going to take? The first thing I think it's going to take is a little bit of a dose of reality. The research has shown, and I think you're probably familiar with some of these numbers, that by middle of the century, 30% of our energy needs or the energy supply is going to come from wind, solar, and other renewables, 30%. And that's in a situation we envision where transportation is going to be based on some different fuels, and where cars and homes are much more efficient than they are today. We believe 30% is what we're looking at in 2050. That leaves 70% of our energy needs supplied by fossil fuels and nuclear. Unless, of course, we have the magic unknown energy source that comes in from somewhere. That's what we're looking at today. So we really want to be sure that we have a dose of reality in this. The other piece of reality that we need, I think, is our research shows that it takes about 30 years for a new type of energy to capture 1% of the energy market. 30 years for 1%. And that's played out both in the biofuels world and in the wind world when you look at how those have come along. And so if you think about it in those terms and at that pace, we've got a long way to go. 2050 is just not that far away if we're really going to make the kind of progress we need to get there with that. So from Shell's perspective, it's about scaling up and moving more quickly and finding the ways to move things along faster. We've got three real focus areas. The first one is to make more energy available. Simply make more energy available. Reduce emissions from the energy. That's a second focus area. And then increasing the share of low carbon energy, and with that, generating jobs. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about making more energy available, and I won't go at length into the other two. We'll leave that for some discussion. But around making more energy available, despite the current events, there is a lot of energy out there. There is a lot of oil and gas out there. If you look at the offshore continental shelf areas that have been previously restricted, there are about 86 billion barrels of oil, we estimate, in those areas. And that's enough to fuel about 85 million cars for 35 years, to help put that into perspective. There are 420 trillion cubic feet of gas in the outer continental shelf of the United States. And that's enough to fuel about 100 million homes for 60 years. So there's a lot out there. There's a lot of energy we can make available. The nut to crack is doing that in a way that that meets our other requirements, low emissions and low carbon intensity in the fuels that we use. So the road is very clear. I'm not sure I have the answer for you to lay out today, but clearly Shell as a company is focused on a pathway to get us where we think we need to be. Okay, a couple words on the others. The reducing emissions. Our focus in that area is around mitigation technologies. And things like carbon capture and storage, we're actively working projects around the globe trying to bring that technology up to scale. And we also believe that we need some help in the carbon valuation side of the equation. So get some carbon pricing and get some type of a market-based trading scheme are the two areas that we're advocating strongly. And then in increasing our share of low carbon intensity fuels, we have about 4 focus areas. The first is around natural gas. And we see natural gas as a bridge fuel. It's lower carbon intensity than a lot of the alternatives, and we see that bridging us as we move toward a more alternative or renewable supply. We also have made some big advances, some big steps, very visible lately on the biofuels side of the business. Biofuels is a great complement to our strengths in oil and gas development and production, and so we see that as an area where we can truly make a commercial difference as a company. We also have wind power generation. We've got wind farms in 7 states, and while I don't know that I could tell you today that wind's going to be the answer, I think regionally there are just a lot of applications for wind that we haven't taken advantage of, and so we're active there. And I mentioned the CCS projects. So I'm going to stop there, and I hope we can delve into some of these a little further, but I want to be sure we get some time with Joel, too.
Thank you, Libby, and thank you, John, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm not sure whether it's by design or circumstance, but my 4 favorite words in the fields in which I operate, which is sustainable business and clean technology, are, I think it's the subtitle of this lunch, what would it take? Behind that really broad question are a million other questions, and it's not just about energy and environment. It's about everything that goes on in our world and all of the many, many issues and challenges that we all face. But certainly, you can add to that just in this, add to that sentence, what would it take to make a low carbon economy? What would it take to make solar grid parity with conventional? What would it take to reduce oil use to some level of energy independence? What would it take to plug a certain hole in the bottom of the Gulf? You can take that anywhere you want, and those are fascinating questions. And when you start to address those questions, you start to peel back a huge range of opportunities, some of the kinds of opportunities that you talked about, Libby, Shell is exploring, but many, many others that all fall in the realm of what this conference, a block or so away, is about, is innovation. There is an extraordinary amount of innovation taking place that goes beyond incremental technology improvement, eco-efficiency improvement, into breakthrough, even radical innovation that shifts business models. And what's very exciting, I've had the great good fortune over the past several years to play with some of the, one in particular, Silicon Valley venture capital firm that has several $1 billion, at least at its disposal to invest in clean technology. And through that, I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time in the Valley listening to and participating in some of those conversations. And it's a very, very different world there in lots of ways, but particularly around the conversations that's taking place around energy. And think about where they're coming from. They're coming from the world of IT and computing. And out of that comes a really interesting potential story. So here and the parallels between what happened in computing, what happened in energy. So here's the history of the past 50 years of computing in under a minute. Right? You start off with a big mainframe computer surrounded by a bunch of dumb terminals that can basically take information from the mainframe. And over time, those terminals got smarter and more self-sufficient and better able to have a two-way conversation with the mainframe, and then able to have a conversation among themselves, and then to able to have a conversation among just about everything, and to do so wirelessly. That's kind of it, right? And that happened because of thousands of innovations from hundreds or maybe even thousands of companies that brought down the price and improved the efficiency of broadband, disk storage, microprocessor speed, and hundreds of other things, to the point that information became so cheap and ubiquitous that it's almost, at least in the developed world, considered free. We don't think, most of us, about how much time we spend doing this or doing this anymore. It's just part of the fabric of our lives. And so what's the connection? Well, that power plant up in Harlem or in Brooklyn or whatever is powering this room here today, that's your mainframe. And we're sitting in, with all due respect to the wonderful people at Sardi's, one of the dumb terminals. Right? It's where we live and work. It can take information from the mainframe, basically. And over time, these dumb terminals are going to get smarter and more self-sufficient and better able to have a two-way conversation with the mainframe, and then able to communicate with other terminals in its area, and then able to communicate with other things, automobiles, and we can talk to it from our iPhones and laptops and probably wristwatches, if people still wear those. And a hundred of other things. And so the conversations that's taking place in Silicon Valley and in the Silicon Valleys of the world are what are the thousands of innovations by hundreds or thousands of companies, some of which are incumbents, the Shells and other oil and gas companies, as well as countless startups, some of which probably haven't been born yet, that are going to bring down the price and improve the efficiency of energy to the point that it becomes so cheap and ubiquitous that it's almost considered free. And how do we, by the way, decarbonize it along the way? So that's a conversation that, first of all, it's 180 degrees from drill, baby, drill. And it's not just this, wow, isn't this cool someday pipe dream? These components are being created in the form of the smart grid and some electric vehicles and the standards that connect them, and smart appliances and alternative renewable energy companies and the software that enables all this stuff to fit together. The building blocks of this are starting to be in place. It's kind of the internet of about 25 years ago. And the result of this is a number of people and companies, both big companies and startups, that are beginning to see this coming mashup, if you will, of energy technology, information technology, building technology, and vehicle technology. They're going to start to fit together in ways that are going to dramatically transform the way we use and think about energy, in ways that we can't imagine yet, in the same way that we couldn't have imagined 15 years ago where the internet is taking us, and we can't imagine where it'll be 15 years from now. And so that is not a replacement for oil and gas. We need everything. It will take a village. But that innovation conversation of how that happens, how efficiency becomes part of that, a critical part of that, how we find the highest and best use of each energy. Does gasoline, for all of its incredible BTU and power, energy carrying capacity, at some point down the line become a specialty fuel for certain types of vehicles because passenger cars and others are being powered somehow in some way differently. So those are fascinating conversations. I'll stop there because it's obviously, like yours, a much longer conversation. But the role of innovation in this is fascinating, and how we get from here to there, I think, is that what will it take conversation that I'm excited to have.
Well, thank you both for your introductions. Of course, I'm a reporter, so it led me to about 1,000 questions. I'll get to a few of them before I ask you for yours. My first question for Joel is, I write about these companies. I get the great pleasure of talking to the people who are coming up with these ideas and testing them and working them at academic labs and industrial labs, staggering innovation. And yet every one of them comes up to a hurdle that I think is fundamentally different than the tech IT hurdle. And there's thermodynamics involved here that as wonderful as your vision is, and as powerful as I think the human imagination is, how do you expect those thermodynamic realities to be overcome, even with all the wonderful efficiency? Certainly you can see great innovations in efficiency. There's a lot of places to squeeze that out. But moving a 4,000-pound car 70 miles down the road safely with a family of 4 that can start up anytime in any weather, et cetera, et cetera. Granted, I didn't think that we could fit Shakespeare on something the size of the thumbnail. But I think there's a thermodynamic question here. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I am not a scientist, nor do I play one in any form. And what you're basically asking is, relative to my analogy before, is there a Moore's law for energy?
Right.
Moore's law was the law that propagated by Gordon Moore, the founder of Intel, that said that every 18 months the density of information density of a chip and the speed and the price will double the speed and half the price, and that's kind of the curve that we've been on, and we're dealing with the law of thermodynamics and not the law of Moore, and so it's a very different equation, and so we will bump up against that, and I don't have an answer to how we do that. I do not have an answer. There's another part of this too. In terms of your family getting in the car, and this is also part of I think the innovation potential that's starting to take place, which is around business model innovation. So let's take cars for example. If you grew up in the United States, and if you grew up in the U.S., it is dogma that cars give us freedom, right? We know that you turn 16 or 18 or something. Unless you live in New York City, which is a different equation, you kind of get a car, and you at least have access to one. And pop culture and the whole society is sort of built around that notion. Well, cars don't give us a lot of freedom. You have to buy them, you have to insure them, and you have to fix them. You have to park them somewhere, and most of the time you're spending in the car, which 98% of the time it's sitting there idle, and when you're in it, you tend to be driving at a 20% occupancy rate at 15 or 20 miles an hour, maybe faster. So it's so what turns out that what gives us freedom in this is mobility. And so now there's I won't go into it because in interest of time, but there's starting to think the business models around how we own cars. So that doesn't get to your question of thermodynamics, but when you start thinking about mobility and how people don't have to own cars, and you think of zip car on steroids and a whole bunch of other business models that are starting to evolve, it really gets to rethinking the question that, yes, if we're just talking about creating more energy or doing a lot more with a lot less energy of what we're already doing, then yes, you bump up against all kinds of limits. But if you think beyond those limits into the world of innovation and think about how, what we're really trying to accomplish here in the ways that we move people and things and information, you start to see pathways that at least put those limits of thermodynamics further out there and let us get a lot further down the path than bumping up against them from the get-go.
Yeah, it seems to me you're designing around the limits, which may well be what we have to do. And that leads me to a question for Libby. To what extent do the users of energy, can they be brought along to change their behavior, or must there be a price signal like a carbon tax or a mandate like CAFE that forces cars to be a certain miles per gallon? What are your thoughts on the users of energy?
Couldn't be better timing, because Joel and I had this discussion just just a few minutes ago. It seems to me, I think consumers today, and I do this test sometimes when I go out to high schools or speak to students. I ask them where their energy comes from, and you'd be really surprised how many of them point to the socket, the electrical socket on the wall. The life cycle is still just not part of our fabric. So we go today from a position where consumers also, I think, as long as you have gas flowing from the pump at the station into your car, that's probably as far as they really are going to delve into it. What's going to change that is not my idea. It's something that Joel planted, is value. When they start to see more value than they get from their gasoline, maybe it's in the form of cheaper, maybe it's in the form of longer distance. It could be any number of forms, but until you get to that value created, you're not going to sway a big consumer difference. So artificially, yeah, you could tax, you can do a lot of things to try and get people's attention, and that'll probably take you a certain distance. But I think you've really got to have something much bigger, much better, before you really capture the whole market.
Can I you just said the word in which the duck drops out of the sky, which is better. What I was saying was that green succeeds only to the extent that green equals better. 21 years ago, I wrote a book called The Green Consumer, and about this great wave of environmentally minded consumers coming into the marketplace. And a good friend of mine just recently said, was talking about the fact that this never happened. And he said, well, you did call it the green consumer. That it was a singular. But consumers for 20 years have been talking about the fact that they want to make good choices and don't. And the fact that, how does green equal better? And most green products and services haven't been better. And so what do we get to do that, if you think, how did we get to the point in music where we, kids, at a certain age saying, Daddy, what was a record store? And we did that, by creating this whole new infrastructure for music, that not because we were running out of polycarbonates to make CDs, but because better technology came along. And so how does transportation, how does all the things that energy provides, come in a better package or in a better value proposition? And that's a huge question, but I think that's the point that because consumers basically want to change without changing. They love the noun, hate the verb, and
Let me ask a similar question along those lines. As a public company with shareholders that has a very profitable business, how do you convince the shareholders to start to wade into to businesses that are not necessarily popular at the moment, and certainly less profitable than the current business?
Boy, that's the ultimate challenge, and I would like to have that nut cracked. I think it's going to be a raising of a level of consciousness through time. It's not something that people all of a sudden say, okay, I'm putting all my money into green stuff today, because just what we talked about, they don't have the signal yet, the price signal or whatever it is that says this is really better. So it's you can't lose sight of the fact as a business that you're there to create shareholder value. And so I think for a company like Shell, it means within those boundaries, trying to find what it is that differentiates, that allows us to continue to use oil and gas, to find the innovations that make that very acceptable for people going forward in time. And it's really the innovations that are going to differentiate between companies and make that happen. I'd like to find some ways to convince consumers they need to put their money into green funds. But I think the only thing we can really do is show them the value proposition of doing that, and that comes with time.
Let me ask one more big picture question up here, and then I'd like to see if you guys have some questions. It's around governments. It's a two-part question.
You take the first part.
What do you both think that ideally the government governments should do to most efficiently and economically help us transform? That's part one. Part two, what do you think is the best thing politically that they can do to get this? I think they're two different things. My feeling is they're two different things. So I want to hear what's ideal, what's the best, and what is possible.
Yeah. Well, I'll give my two quick, and then you can decide if you agree or not. I think the very best thing that they could do is have a comprehensive energy policy, something that we have.
No matter what the policy is, just.
Well, yeah. I mean, we could go details row by row, but I think the fact that we put something on the table as an energy policy to give us a cohesive policy to align around is really important. And I would hope that it includes things like a cap and trade on CO2 to try and help us move down the road to getting some value around CO2. But comprehensively, there are lots of things on the table, lots of policies been proposed out there. Nothing yet has politically, I think, grabbed enough to really gain ground. But that's where we need to be, and we need to have that policy recognize the global nature of our world too. It can't be isolationist. It has to be something that really works globally together. And so your second question was, what can they do? And I haven't given up on the energy policy. I think there's some good road there, good pathway. What can they do, though, I think, is around the regulatory world. It's making sure that as we put regulatory policy together, it's not so much about, specifically how we do things and trade-offs of one product maybe for another, things that kind of tilt the playing field for companies. It's really trying to make things smoother on a regulatory basis. I'm not saying you need more, you need less. I'm saying it needs to be thought through in a different way. And I think that's something that they can do.
So I'm not a policy geek by any stretch, but I agree at a high level that having a set policy on both energy and carbon would be the ideal starters. But if you look at any technological transformation over at least the last 50 years, it really is there are three levers that you can pull, and of which policy is one, and the other two are technology and capital. And whatever the technological change, whether it's from the Industrial Revolution all the way through the internet and wireless and everything else, it's usually the pulling of those levers in coordinated fashion where this happens best. I mean, you could pull one lever really hard. You could mandate that everybody must have solar on their roof or some such thing, and that would drive certain things in certain ways. You could change the business model and things like that. But it's really a coordination of when to pull that policy lever and when not to. And so I think figuring out that what's the optimum coordination of those things with the technology community and the capital financial institutions. I mean, that's a conversation that really isn't happening at a coordinated level. It's kind of happening ad hoc. So that's what I think is ideal. On the what's possible part, again, without getting into the policy prescriptions, I'm going to skirt that and do an end around it. Because I think it's what I would really like to see is a vision of what's possible here. Because we don't have, nobody in or out of politics has created a vision of what happens if we get things right. Which is sort of funny. We're all working towards something, and people talk about energy independence, and people talk about stopping climate change, which are a lot of ideal goals and laudable, but it's not very inspiring. And yet there is this story of what happens around job creation and economic development and economic growth around energy security and food security and water security and job and housing, around public health and environmental health and climate and all of that starts to create if it's told well, it becomes a very compelling story. And that's not just the role of a president or national leadership. It's the role up and down in the policy community and in the corporate community and throughout. And it's that lack of a story that we don't really get what it is. We don't get what the goal is, what happens, what success looks like. And so I think there's an opportunity for some leadership at the political level to create a vision that people would start to say, well, if that's really possible, why wouldn't we do that? Then we get the political capital.
Let me open the floor up. Anybody have any questions? Please, I need to remind you we're going to need to use a microphone because we're filming this. Great, thanks. And we'll bring it up. We can't hear you.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
I'll repeat your question so we'll get it.
You talk about innovation new energies like farm wind, biofuels. As what in my industry, we are trying our engines are trying biofuels, and it sounds good that it's greener than petrol. But is it really true? It's what's happening with the changing habits of population that is changing big surface of vegetables or trees. So in order to
Okay, I'll repeat the question. Tell me if I two questions. Tell me if I have them wrong. First question is, how do you evaluate the external effects of relying on biofuels, on land use, things like that? Is that correct? And the second question is, how can we build up an industry that, like wind, solar, that is based so heavily on government subsidies? Libby, why don't you take the biofuel question?
Okay, I'll take the biofuel question. It really sends me back to the discussion around ethanol and some of the unintended consequences that we learned about with mandating certain levels of ethanol in our gasoline. You have to look at the life cycle of the consequences. It's not just about the benefit today, and you certainly can't favor one political group or one area of the country. You can't play favorites like that and not end up with some unintended consequences. So sustainability is, the companies that are sustainable and have sustainable policies are going to look at the whole life cycle. And I'll give you an example from Shell. There was we had the opportunity to lease some land in Malaysia. I think it was in the Far East. We were going to lease some land, and we were going to develop some biofuel, second generation biofuel type products there. In our due diligence, we found that the land that we were going to use had been stripped for palm oil type development. And our business principles say that we don't develop in areas that have been used in that way. And so we made the decision not to lease. So it really, if you don't look at the whole life cycle and if you don't build that into your business decisions, you're going to find yourself falling into that same learning trap over and over. That's a small example maybe, but it's an attitude. And I think you have to look at companies and look at the products they're delivering and make decisions based on who is putting that forward.
Joel, you want to take the subsidy question?
Sure. I always find the subsidy question interesting because it implies that other energy sources aren't subsidized. There was a study that came out on Monday, just this week, and forgive me, I don't remember the source, but it was a front page of the FT on Monday. that said that global subsidies for energy are $557 billion. It's over $500 billion. And it didn't break it down in the article, and I couldn't find it yet online. But I can assure you that 90, if not 95, or even 98% of that was for incumbent fossil fuel and nuclear technologies. And so to talk about it, and we hear this not just with biofuels, with how can we make solar or wind cost competitive without subsidies? Well, no energy source is cost competitive, with the exception of photosynthesis, is cost competitive without subsidies. And that's, so then it comes back to, well, where does government want to place its bets? And that becomes a policy question, but it's not simply it really, if everything could compete on a level playing field, it would be a very different world. And I can't predict how things would play out in terms of cost efficiency, but it would be, or cost parity. But this is about which subsidies, not if. It's where do you want to put them. Subsidies are there.
Just an aside here. Not in the past few months, I have called every think tank from left, right, and center, every university energy research center, everybody I can think of, to see if I could find out a comprehensive, unbiased accounting of subsidies for energy by energy type. It's impossible to find. The one person I found one person who did it about 7 years ago. It took him 2 years and hasn't got the funding to do it again. It's just impossible to find. Mm-hmm. All right, and another question. We have a question up here in the front.
I'm going to try the mic for this. No, become part of the panel here. Right?
You're welcome.
Hi, thanks. It's really a great panel. Actually, my question is really around risk mitigation as it relates to fossil fuel futures. Mm-hmm. Brandon Nicely with Strategian Center for Social Innovation. We're actually, a little plug here, we have a Pepsi challenge this month. We have a grant we're trying to get everybody to vote for disaster relief, applying innovation practice to disaster relief and response. So go vote. Anyway, besides that, I used to work in oil and gas, and I'm very familiar with their safety practices. I mean, the companies like Shell and Exxon and others and BP are very focused on safety. But what I haven't heard a lot about is, innovation starts with identifying opportunities, unmet needs of current market spaces, right? So as it relates to deep water drilling, it's been only relatively recently we've gone past 5,000 into 10,000 feet drilling all over the world. And as these reserves become more critical, I presume that that's going to continue. What sort of collaborative process, or is there an approach, cross-organization, to understand the risks and or focus on mitigating the cleanup? Is there a process in place? Is there an organization in place? I think those are just general comment.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple kind of hinge points maybe around this. It's scalability in any industry is a lot of learning by doing. And so as we drill deeper wells, of course, each and every one of those comes with its own book of how we did things and how we think things need to be done in the future. Around risk mitigation, we've got platforms. We've got a Perdido platform. I think there's some literature on it in the theater. It's a state-of-the-art facility, and in designing and implementing that facility, we went to the depth that you're talking about to do risk mitigation. So we had a lot of redundant systems in place. We looked at the whole life cycle of what ifs. Now, have we guessed all the worst case scenarios? Well, I can tell you that we're going back and doing all of that again. And this is not an opportunity that will be wasted. As tragic as it is, we're going to make sure that we have covered all bases. I don't think there's a difference in any of the companies you mentioned. I think every one of them is going back comprehensively and looking at that, and looking at it from the risk mitigation viewpoint, so that before we start, we've got the redundancies in place. We've got the technologies that maybe we haven't needed the first 100 wells that we've drilled, but I think you're going to see. Certainly in the days to come, when the moratorium is lifted, and we do believe that we can do it safely, we're going to have a lot of redundant what-if type mitigations in place.
Unfortunately, we have time for just one more question. Over here, over here.
Give me loud, but thanks. Thanks, Joel. I'm Kara Hurst with BSR. My question is about hearing you call for comprehensive energy policy. It sounds interesting to me to hear a large company call for regulation. And I understand that would take some of the uncertainty out of the market. But what I also hear from many companies I work with is that regulation stifles innovation. So how do you both call for regulation, comprehensive policy development, and expect that that might encourage some innovation that we obviously desperately need?
Go ahead.
Well, I'll address the second part. I mean, that's not a uniform that regulation stifles innovation. Regulation can be a driver for innovation. Michael Porter certainly has taken that stance for 20, 30 years, whatever. So I think that it's really about smart regulation. It's about a regulation that sets goals, creates some baseline, takes watches after the cheaters and laggards, of which there always are in any sector, and really inspires and sets big bold goals. We haven't had big bold goals certainly not in the United States and very few outside it. I think we see some in Asia, a little bit in Europe. It's really to make these blanket statements that subsidies are bad, regulation is bad. I think we have to get a little bit less. I'm not accusing you of paralysis, but we have to get a little bit beyond those conversations and start to really look at what kind of innovation has worked and spurred innovation and helped us to get there, as opposed to the command and control things that I think you're referring to in your question.
Yeah, it's how we get there versus where we get that I think is the difference, and there could be a lot of different ways. We want the regulations to tell us what the objective is and not tell us every step along the way. So it's a little subtle difference, but the innovation then comes in as you're encouraged by where you need to get to as a standard.
Thank you all for your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to more of them, and thanks to our panelists who did a wonderful job.